The summer air hung heavy with the humid tension of a city on edge, a tension that exploded in a flash on Elm Street. Miss Evelyn Reed, a woman whose every movement exuded quiet authority and sharp intellect, had merely paused her evening stroll to observe a street vendor being harassed by Officer Barnes. Barnes, a burly figure known for his aggressive tactics and short temper, was demanding a permit the vendor insisted he didn't need for his type of pop-up. Evelyn, a trained legal observer, calmly interjected, reminding Barnes of municipal ordinances regarding street commerce. Her voice was level, her tone respectful, but her words, laced with undeniable knowledge, seemed to ignite a fury in Barnes. For more gripping tales from the hidden corners of justice and beyond, subscribe to Dark Side of Luna, where the shadows hold the truth. Stay out of this, lady, Barnes roared, stepping into Evelyn's personal space, his face contorted in a sneer. This doesn't concern you. You want to interfere with an officer. You can come down to the precinct, too. Evelyn held her ground, her gaze steady. I'm merely observing, officer, and reminding you of proper procedure. Excessive force or harassment of citizens is not proper procedure. The crowd, drawn by the escalating confrontation, had grown, many pulling out cell phones, recording. Barnes's face, already flushed with anger, darkened to a dangerous crimson. He detested being challenged, especially in public, and especially by a black woman who spoke with such quiet confidence. Oh, you want to talk procedure, he snarled. I'll show you procedure. With a sudden, shocking burst of violence, Officer Barnes shoved Evelyn Reed hard. She stumbled backward, tripping over her own feet, and fell heavily onto the unforgiving pavement. A collective gasp rose from the crowd, quickly followed by outraged shouts. Evelyn winced in pain, her hand instinctively going to her bruised hip, but she didn't cry out. She pushed herself up slowly, her eyes still locked on Barnes, not with fear, but with a profound, chilling focus. Barnes, breathing heavily, stood over her, his chest puffed out, daring her to speak. That's resisting, lady. That's what you get for interfering, he barked, his voice laced with triumph. He ignored the furious murmurs of the crowd, the flashing camera phones. He believed he had asserted his dominance, proven his point. He believed he had just put an insignificant woman back in her place. He had no idea of the seismic shift that was about to occur. Evelyn Reed slowly rose to her full height, dusting off her coat with meticulous care. Her composure was absolute, almost unnerving. The pain was real, but her expression remained unreadable, save for a glimmer of ice in her eyes. Officer Barnes, she stated, her voice calm, clear, and cutting through the angry shouts of the crowd. You just made the gravest mistake of your career. And I promise you, you will regret it more than any action you have ever taken. Barnes scoffed, rolling his eyes, completely missing the quiet, profound threat in her words. He just saw defiance, not destiny. Officer Barnes woke up the next morning feeling oddly invigorated. The confrontation on Elm Street had been invigorating. That woman, Evelyn Reed, with her calm voice and sharp legal talk, had tried to undermine him in front of a crowd. But he put her in her place. He even bragged about it in the precinct break room, sipping his coffee. She went down like a sack of potatoes, he chuckled, earning a few appreciative snorts from his peers. Some people just need to learn respect, right? He saw no fault in his actions, no consequence beyond a vague sense of a job well done. The crowd's outrage was just typical anti-police sentiment, easily dismissed. His self-satisfaction was momentarily interrupted when a young desk sergeant approached, holding a formal-looking envelope. Officer Barnes, this just came down. Internal Affairs Disciplinary Hearing. For you, 10 a.m. sharp. Barnes took the envelope, a casual frown creasing his brow. Disciplinary hearing? What for? Probably some old lady complaining about a bruise. Bunch of busybodies. He scoffed, tossing the envelope onto a pile of papers. He'd been through these before. A few stern words, maybe a short suspension if he was unlucky, but nothing that stuck. He was a good cop, a tough cop. He'd be back on the streets by next week. At precisely 10 a.m., Officer Barnes strode into the hearing room, a casual indifference on his face. He nodded perfunctorily to the clerk and the stern-faced internal affairs officers already seated. His eyes scanned the room for the usual panel. Some captains, maybe a deputy chief. He settled into a chair, crossing his arms, ready to go through the motions. He was confident, even a little bored. This would be quick. Then, the heavy oak door at the far end of the room opened, and she walked in. Officer Barnes's jaw went slack. His casual posture evaporated, replaced by rigid terror. His breath hitched in his throat. Standing there, walking with an undeniable air of authority towards the head of the long, polished table was Ms. Evelyn Reed. The same woman he had publicly shoved to the ground just yesterday. The woman he had mocked and dismissed. She wore a tailored suit, her demeanor utterly composed, her gaze sweeping the room with an almost regal air. She reached the head of the table, paused for a beat, her eyes, cool and piercing, settling directly on Officer Barnes. Then, with a practiced, deliberate movement, she took her seat beneath the shining nameplate. Chief Justice Evelyn Reed. A chilling silence descended upon the room, broken only by the frantic pounding of Barnes's own heart. His face drained of all color, his earlier bravado melting into a sickly pallor. He felt a cold dread creep through his veins, realizing with gut-wrenching certainty that his entire world had just been irrevocably, catastrophically upended. Evelyn Reed, the woman he had assaulted, was not just an observer, not just a concerned citizen. She was his judge, his jury, and quite possibly his executioner. Her eyes, still holding the ice he had seen yesterday, now held something more, the quiet power of undeniable authority. "Good morning, Officer Barnes," Chief Justice Evelyn Reed stated, her voice calm, clear, and utterly devoid of emotion, a stark contrast to his spiraling panic. "We have much to discuss regarding your conduct yesterday on Elm Street." Chief Justice Evelyn Reed's gaze was like a laser, dissecting Officer Barnes where he sat. "Officer Barnes," she began, her voice calm but resonant with authority. "Let's begin with your account of the incident on Elm Street yesterday. Specifically, your decision to physically assault Ms. Reed myself, in front of a dozen witnesses." Barnes swallowed hard, his voice a pathetic croak. "Chief Justice, I didn't know it was you, ma'am. It was a mistake. She was interfering, obstructing. I felt threatened." He tried to regain a sliver of his bravado, a desperate attempt to paint himself as the victim of circumstances. "You were yelling, attracting a crowd. I had to maintain order." Evelyn raised a perfectly manicured hand, cutting him off. "Officer Barnes, surveillance footage from Elm Street, gathered from multiple civilian cameras, shows me speaking calmly, observing the vendor. It shows you escalating, using abusive language, and then, without provocation, shoving me to the ground. There was no threat, only your temper." She paused, letting the truth hang heavy in the air. "Now, let's talk about maintaining order. Is it standard procedure in your precinct to resort to physical force against a citizen merely for speaking?" Barnes shifted uncomfortably, his eyes darting to the internal affairs officers observing the proceedings, then back to Evelyn. He was cornered, but he instinctively reached for a familiar departmental defense. It's how things are done, ma'am," he mumbled, his voice barely audible. "We're told to assert control. Zero tolerance for defiance, especially in these kinds of neighborhoods." Evelyn's eyes narrowed slightly. "These kinds of neighborhoods, officer? Are you suggesting there's a different standard procedure for Elm Street compared to, say, the affluent uptown districts?" Barnes, desperate to deflect, nodded eagerly. "Yes, ma'am. It's unspoken, but we're pressured to keep a tight lid on things in areas prone to disorder. Captain Davies, he always says, show him who's in charge, or they'll walk all over you. It's how we hit our proactive policing numbers." He threw Captain Davies's name out like a shield, hoping to share the blame. Evelyn's expression remained impassive, but her mind was already connecting dots. Proactive policing numbers, she mused. Interesting. She then gestured to an internal affairs officer. "Officer Davies, please pull up Officer Barnes's disciplinary record and his body camera footage from the last 12 months, specifically cases involving resisting arrest or disorderly conduct in the Elm Street district." Barnes's face paled further. "No, wait. That's not fair. Those were all legitimate. The internal affairs officer quickly retrieved the files. As they were projected onto a screen for all to see, a damning pattern emerged. Barnes had an astonishing number of resisting arrest charges, almost exclusively against young black men or street vendors in lower-income areas. More horrifyingly, a significant number of his body cam footage files from those incidents were either corrupted, missing, or had convenient technical difficulties at critical moments, similar to the now famous case of Julian Carter. The department had repeatedly dismissed these anomalies, issuing minor reprimands or reassigning him. There was a clear, unspoken policy of protection for officers like Barnes, enabling their aggressive tactics. The silence in the room was deafening. Barnes watched, horrified, as his career of unchecked aggression unraveled before his very eyes. Evelyn Reed leaned forward, her voice cutting through the heavy air. "Officer Barnes," she stated, "it appears your actions yesterday were not an isolated incident, but a deeply disturbing pattern. A pattern that seems to have been implicitly, if not explicitly, condoned, or at the very least, deliberately overlooked by your superiors. We are no longer just discussing your conduct. We are discussing the conduct of this entire department." Her gaze sharpened, now fixed beyond Barnes towards the invisible structures that had allowed him to operate with impunity. Chief Justice Evelyn Reed allowed the weight of the projected evidence, Barnes's falsified reports, the suspiciously corrupted body cam footage, the damning pattern of arrests, to settle over the room. Barnes, seeing his entire life's ugly truth laid bare, finally cracked. He lifted his head, eyes bloodshot and filled with a desperate, pathetic plea. "It wasn't just Captain Davies, Chief Justice," he blurted out, his voice raw with fear. "He was just giving us our orders, his suggestions on how to keep the peace. But the real pressure, the quotas, they came from higher up. From the commissioner's office itself." A collective gasp rippled through the room. Internal affairs officers exchanged stunned glances. The idea of the police commissioner being involved in such a scheme was unthinkable, a betrayal of the highest order. But Evelyn Reed's expression remained unchanged, a silent challenge for Barnes to continue. Barnes, now spilling everything, desperate to save himself, stammered, "Not the commissioner, Chief Justice. Not Commissioner Thorne. He was just the messenger boy for something else. It was Mr. Gideon Vance, the philanthropist, the one who funds all those community outreach programs, the youth centers. He's the one who was telling Captain Thorne where to put the pressure, what neighborhoods to clean up. He used to call it proactive community development, but it was always about suppressing the vote." The room plunged into an even deeper, more chilling silence. Gideon Vance. The name resonated with respect and admiration across the city. A prominent black businessman, a beloved community leader, a celebrated philanthropist whose face adorned billboards promoting peace and unity. He was the city's darling, a symbol of progress and hope. The idea that he was orchestrating a system of racial profiling and voter suppression from behind a facade of charity was monstrous, almost unfathomable. Yet, Barnes's words, though desperate, carried the ring of terrified truth. Evelyn Reed's eyes, for the first time, showed a flicker of profound shock, quickly replaced by a cold, calculating fury. This was beyond a bad cop or even a corrupt captain. This was a direct betrayal of the very community Gideon Vance claimed to uplift. Barnes, now a torrent of confessions, detailed how Vance's community initiatives were fronts, providing cover for the increased police presence and aggressive policing that systematically targeted activists, community organizers, and anyone encouraging voter registration in key districts. The proactive policing wasn't about crime, it was about fear. It was about depressing voter turnout to ensure certain political incumbents, secretly aligned with Vance's shadowy business interests, stayed in power. As Barnes frantically described Gideon Vance's methods, he mentioned specific targets. He wanted certain community leaders silenced, ma'am. He especially hated that little legal observer, Ms. Aaliyah Johnson. And he was furious about that Elm Street vendor who wouldn't pay Gideon's protection fee to operate in his zone. The names hit Evelyn Reed like a physical blow. Aaliyah Johnson was her mentee, a brilliant young lawyer whom Evelyn had personally guided. And the Elm Street vendor, he was a longtime family friend, a man who had bravely refused to be extorted by what he thought were local thugs. It wasn't random. Gideon Vance had known exactly who Evelyn was, and by assaulting her, Barnes had merely been executing a brutal public warning, a message from the puppet master himself. The realization was chilling. Gideon Vance hadn't just used Officer Barnes, he had used the entire department as his private militia, twisting the very concept of community safety into a tool for political manipulation and personal gain, preying on his own people. And he had deliberately targeted Evelyn, a beacon of justice, sending a clear, violent message. Evelyn Reed stood up slowly, her composure now a shield for an incandescent rage. This was no longer just a disciplinary hearing. This was an unmasking. "Secure Officer Barnes," she commanded, her voice ringing with newfound steel. "And summon an immediate, confidential meeting with the State Attorney General's office and the Federal Bureau of Investigation. This is no longer a matter for internal affairs. This is a criminal conspiracy, and it involves the highest levels of this city. We are going to expose every single thread of Gideon Vance's web." The air in the hearing room crackled with the electric tension of a truth finally brought to light, a powerful force unleashed against a deeply entrenched, insidious evil. The moment Officer Barnes's confession spilled Gideon Vance's name, Chief Justice Evelyn Reed moved with an unstoppable force. There was no hesitation, no doubt. Within hours, a secure conference call was established with the State Attorney General and high-ranking FBI officials. Evelyn's calm, precise account, backed by Barnes's terrified testimony and the initial surveillance footage, painted a chilling picture of a beloved public figure secretly orchestrating a vast criminal conspiracy of voter suppression and police misconduct. The mask of philanthropy had been ripped away, revealing a puppet master manipulating the very fabric of democracy. The investigation that followed was unprecedented in its scope and speed. Federal agents, guided by Evelyn's strategic insights and intimate knowledge of the city's political landscape, meticulously tracked Gideon Vance's illicit financial network. They uncovered shell corporations, laundered money funneled through his community outreach programs, and irrefutable digital evidence of his direct communications with Captain Davies, commanding tactical policing actions designed to intimidate specific neighborhoods before elections. His protection fees for street vendors were revealed as extortion, and Evelyn's own assault was exposed as a calculated act of intimidation, meant to send a message to any legal observer who dared to challenge his control. The arrests were dramatic, televised nationwide. Gideon Vance, once the city's darling, was apprehended during a televised charity gala, his stunned face collapsing as the cameras flashed. Captain Davies, betrayed by Barnes, was taken into custody at the precinct. Their co-conspirators, the corrupt city officials, and a compromised judge, were rounded up, their carefully constructed lives of power reduced to public shame. The trials were landmark events, watched by a captivated nation. Chief Justice Evelyn Reed's testimony was a masterclass in judicial integrity and a searing indictment of the systemic corruption. She laid bare how Vance had exploited racial divisions, using police as his personal enforcers to suppress the votes of his own community, all to maintain political control and protect his illicit empire. The raw footage of Officer Barnes's assault on Evelyn herself, played for the jury, shocked the public and underscored the brutal reality of their scheme. The verdicts were resounding, guilty on all counts. Gideon Vance, the fallen philanthropist, received a lengthy prison sentence for voter suppression, racketeering, and conspiracy. Captain Davies and Officer Barnes were convicted for their roles in police misconduct, excessive force, and obstruction of justice, facing significant time behind bars. The compromised judge and city officials were disbarred and imprisoned, their careers in ruins. The impact on the city was transformative. The police department, under a new, integrity-driven leadership handpicked by Evelyn Reed, underwent a complete overhaul. The proactive policing quotas were abolished, replaced by community-first initiatives and rigorous anti-bias training. Citizen oversight boards, empowered by Evelyn's advocacy, were established to ensure true accountability. The funds recovered from Vance's illicit activities were redirected, not into new development schemes, but into genuine community empowerment programs, voter registration drives, and legal aid clinics, becoming a tangible legacy of the justice served. Chief Justice Evelyn Reed, once publicly assaulted, now stood as a towering figure of unwavering justice. Her name became synonymous with integrity, her actions sparking a national conversation about hidden power structures and the ongoing fight for true democratic fairness. She continued to serve, her every ruling a testament to the principles she so fiercely defended. The shadows of corruption had been banished, the chains of manipulation broken. The city, finally free from the insidious grip of those who sought to control it, began to heal, empowered by the knowledge that even the most deeply entrenched darkness could not withstand the unwavering light of truth and the quiet strength of one woman who refused to be silenced. For more gripping tales from the hidden corners of justice and beyond, subscribe to Dark Side of Luna, where the shadows hold the truth.